Hi everyone, I'm Hannah, also known as Singing Hin. I'm a professional musician and singing teacher. So I teach singing, I teach all about the voice and how you can help get more confidence in your voice, both literally the voice that you speak with, but also your voice in terms of what you need to say and making sure you can get that out there with confidence. Last week we looked at the talking drums, which are sending a language within the drums across great distances to give information to other tribes and other settlements. This week I thought we'd look at other forms of communication within musical instruments, particularly and specifically the trumpets and things like the Great Highland bagpipe, which are a very loud bagpipe, and the trumpet, as you know, can be rather loud. So these instruments were used in situations where you needed to really carry the sound over quite often either loud noises like a battlefield or over loud noises like huge crowds. So while we're not talking about the great distances of travelling between settlements that we spoke about last week with the talking drums, this time it's about carrying that sound over great crowds of people so that they can all hear. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So they were used for ceremonial. So if you had great crowds and you were trying to use sound to cue people to what they needed to do next, then you could use trumpets. So think about fanfares. And fanfares were also used at the battlefield or in training on for military. So a fanfare can be like a I know, I'm here all week. But essentially that would be a trumpet fanfare, and that da 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 will have a specific meaning, as opposed to a da 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 da, which would have a totally different meaning. So you're looking at a super small motif, that we like to call it, just a little snippet of song almost, that each one has a meaning. So one of those in a military sense might be put the knives on your bayonet. One of them might be everybody turn to the left, anything like that. And again, it's a way of carrying that where voices no longer work because they're not loud enough and they won't carry far enough. You're using a trumpet to do that. These could also move huge armies and say, right, we want this entire battalion to go to the left or to go round to the back of the enemy. So again, they could be specific. You might have one motif which is saying this battalion, and then another motif which says move to the left. So you could start creating syntax, almost little sentences of communication with these trumpets. Now later on, they started picking up and using bagpipes, the Great Highland pipes specifically, because they are a very big sound. They're an outdoor instrument. The sound travels hugely, and as you will probably be aware, these are used certainly in the Highlands of Scotland by the Highland clans in battle. And again, you would have your piper on the field who would be piping the instructions of the person in charge. I'm going to say general, but it won't have been if it was clans. But the person in charge will have been relaying his instructions to the piper, who would be then sending it out once again as small motifs of sound almost, which are recognizable to that clan or those soldiers on the battlefield. Now the other part of that is you can almost have that as a code, in that it's possible that you could have motifs that are not recognizable to the enemy, so that you're piping something which means your soldiers know what they're doing, but the enemy doesn't know what that is, because these aren't motifs that are potentially shared universally. So you've got two aspects to it, in that it's communication, but it's also secret communication. It wasn't just used on the battlefield, though. And if I refer to something that's very much in the consciousness of us all, not just here in Britain, but across the globe, I don't think it's been missed, which is the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. And if you happened to watch her funeral or see any photographs of her funeral, it was a huge pomp and circumstance in a way, in that there was a lot of piping, there was a lot of trumpets, and there were a lot of fanfares being blown. I'm going to use that term in, and a lot of that is tradition and ceremony. But in the past, they had a meaning, and they still do have a meaning, in that you will often have a piper at a funeral piping a lament. And that is, if you hear that, even if you're not part of that funeral, if you hear a lament, you know what it means. Think about the last post in November on Armistice Day, and the last post is often a trumpet or a cornet is playing that, or we can pipe it, and I have piped it. Not the last post, but similar. But they are laments, and they are often about memory and remembering soldiers that have given their life for us. And that piece of music, the last post, is so evocative, because we all know in our common consciousness, if I get there, we all know that that piece of music is asking us to stop and remember. And even if you're not around the cenotaph at that point, or the war memorial at that point, even if you're out doing your shopping, let's say, and you hear that last post, you cannot help but think about what it means. Alongside trumpets and pipes, you had the fife and drum, which we have probably all heard about in our time. And that was literally, the drums were the sort of the snare drums that would roll and give different beats underneath. And above that, the fife, a high-pitched wooden instrument, a bit like a piccolo, would be cutting over the top of all the noise of battle, with instructions for the infantry and to where to go. And if I remember, the fife and drum were more to do with the infantry, and the trumpets and bugles were more to do with the cavalry, if I have that right. And so these motifs that are played on specific instruments have both a meaning to those people who are watching and are part of the ceremony, but they can also have a greater meaning within our consciousness. And these fanfares are, a lot of them are quite old, and they will have had even greater meaning and would have been communicating to great crowds of people. But we have carried that through our consciousness to today. So I love that idea of communication, that it's communication with the people that were there, but it's also a communication that's carried socially through the years, through us, to communicate almost an emotion as well. So that's it for this week, and I'll join you next week when we're going to take a look at something totally different. I'll see you then. Take care, guys.